of the ceremony for us. So come on, get close. Gather around. Don't make them yell.
It's like I'm in class again. Come on.
I'm used to filling larger spaces than this.
All right.
So don't worry about that. Okay, but thank you, David, for everything. And I just want to share some thoughts. Remembering Dr. Harold C. Norman. Dr. Norman was the first person I ever met at Wagner College. The summer before I began at the school, I made an appointment to meet some members of the music department. Dr. Norman was wearing a neckerchief, similar to that in the picture that will be displayed. Sitting behind the secretary's desk in North Hall, which is now Reynolds House, smoking. It became immediately apparent that I wasn't in high school anymore and that the college was filled with free spirits. We went into his office and talked for a while. Later that day, I met and played for Dan Bremer, who would be my school teacher, my bassoon teacher, and Dr. Cross, who gave me a crumhorn to take home to practice. I had 2 classes with Dr. Norman, intermediate musicianship in my sophomore year and advanced musicianship in my junior year. As he was the chair in both those years, he only taught those 2 classes. But his time at the Wagner goes way back. Through examining contemporary newspapers and materials now kept in the Wagner College archive, I have been able to piece together at least parts of his biography. Harold C. Norman was from Cresco, Iowa, the city that near the borders with Wisconsin and Minnesota. At the time of his birth, on October 21st, 1917, that city had 3,000 people in it. Today it has around 800 more than that, but it is still very small. In spite of this, and perhaps because it was on a train line, it had an opera house dating to 1914. Many small cities had opera houses, which were not large theaters, but mostly served as venues for traveling performers. The Cresco Theater would later be used as a cinema, although today it has reverted to its original use and features live performances. Even though the theater was not large by modern standards, the original theater set 725 people. Around a quarter of the whole city could fit into it. He was the son of the Reverend H.M. Norman and his wife, and his father served 3 churches in the area, in Cresco, Ridgeway, and Orleans, all in northern Iowa. His older brother Rolf also became a Lutheran pastor and served a congregation in Bowman, North Dakota. After high school, he went to Wagner College in Decorah, Iowa, where he graduated in 1839. Upon graduation, he was awarded a scholarship to study at the Leipzig Conservatory in Germany. The original plan was for Harold to travel to Europe with his brother, and the 2 of them would tour to 14 cities in Germany. Then he would return to Leipzig and go to the conservatory for a year, and then go to Oslo and London, and then come home. Rolf would leave Germany and go to Denmark, Norway, and England, and then return to his church in North Dakota. With these plans in place, Pastor and Mrs. Norman drove their sons to New Jersey, where they boarded a ship on August 15, 1939, in Hoboken to take them to Europe. They arrived in France on August 24th, just in time for the beginning of World War II. This changed all their plans. Although they said they would write every day, communications were interrupted and their parents had no idea where they were. They first went to Denmark, where they tried to get home via Greenland, but ultimately made it to Holland and then to England, where they sailed through dangerous waters to get back to New York on the SS Rotterdam after their father wired them $100, which is around $2,100 in today's currency. A newspaper report tells us that Harold gave a travelogue of his journeys to the church group in Cresco. From there, he went to teach music in Ellenville, North Dakota, until August of 1942, when he reported for military service. I do not know whether his military service was in a musical group or not. I don't recall him ever mentioning it. Once the war was over, he returned to New York. He was hired by Wagner College in 1949, the same year as Zigvart Steen. Steen was both a graduate of and a professor at Wagner College, but the connection between the hiring of Norman and Steen the same year is unclear. Later on, another Wagner College graduate, Ronald Lee, would also teach in the Wagner Music Department. What is known is that Dr. Norman studied at Columbia University's Teachers College, most likely under the GI Bill, and earned his doctorate there in 1955. By 1960, he was an associate professor at Wagner and took over the Wagner College choir the year when Steen was on sabbatical. Also around this time, he married Polly Carmack, an Irish-American woman. He often mentioned her, but I don't recall ever meeting her during my years at Wagner. I remember him telling me they went to Germany early in their marriage to attend the Bayreuth Festival. The first post-war festival was in 1951, so it must have been around then. He must also have worked as a church organist at this time, in as much as he was an officer in the Staten Island chapter of the American Guild of Organists. He wrote a work called The Music of the Lutheran Service in 1955, which may have been tied to his doctoral degree. His knowledge of the Lutheran liturgy was immense, and many of his surviving compositions are liturgical in nature. At some point, he was promoted to full professor and became music department chairman at Wagner. Dr. Cross once said that Dr. Norman hated being at Wagner and that he thought he would be hired by Teachers College. While he may have been disappointed that TC didn't hire him, I cannot believe he didn't like Wagner. He went above and beyond. For instance, I suggested to him once that we give a joint recital. You may remember in those days every Thursday afternoon was performance time. He agreed to my proposal and started to seriously practice the oboe. We gave a recital that included duets for oboe and bassoon by Alan Hovanish and Gottfried von Naumann, who was Beethoven's teacher, and a trio sonata by Friedrich Wilhelm Zakov, who was Handel's teacher, in which we were joined by Philip Nuzo on the harpsichord and Dr. Cross playing the viola da gamba. There were other pieces on the program, but I forget what they were. Someday the program will come to life. I remember how proud he was toward the end of our time together when he became the most senior faculty member in the school and he got to carry the mace at graduation. The music department did very well during his time. There were many ensembles at the school, not only the Collegium and the choir, but also the band and the community college orchestra, and later on a brass ensemble that Dr. Cross conducted. Dr. Norman did a lot to support the music program and to keep it going strong. He gave up being chairman during my last year at Wagner in preparation for retirement. He sold his house, and for a while he and his wife lived on campus in a faculty apartment in Guild Hall. He retired in, I believe, 1981 and moved with Polly to his beloved house on Cape Cod, where he had spent vacations for years. We stayed in contact for a while, and I asked him about composing music for early instruments, but we fell out of touch in the music department, and Wagner moved on without him. He died on November 2nd, 1995, and no one at the school seemed to notice. There was no obituary in the magazine, in the Wagner Alumni Magazine. After his death, his musical holographs and other writings and papers came into the possession of Brad Williams, who was the organist of the First Congregational Church of Wellfleet, who also played at Dr. Norman's memorial service on November 19th, 1995. He sent the music to Carlton Sperati, a grandson of Luther College music faculty member Carlo Sperati and a Luther College alumnus himself, just as Dr. Norman was. Carlton Sperati donated the material to the archives at Luther College, where it is today. I am very grateful to Haley Jackson, the archivist at Luther College, for scanning pieces of music and for answering questions. If I had to pick one word for Dr. Norman as a composer, it would be practical. Unlike so many composers, he did not leave behind pieces for large orchestra with all of his music. All of his music is instead for soloists and small ensembles. Most of his work is for churches. There are organ solos and works for choir. Among the latter are a number of works written for the Lutheran liturgy, a proclamation for Easter, an Amen, other responses. He also wrote some larger choral pieces, including a grandiose setting of Charles Wesley's Praise to the Lord Who Reigns Above for four-part chorus and organ, and a simpler setting of Worthy is the Lamb from the Book of Revelation. The latter piece, although written for four-part choir, is usually with the sopranos and altos singing unison and the tenors and basses doing the same, so it is basically a two-part choir. And although the organ part calls for pedals, the pedal part is very easy. One of the pieces listed in the memorial service appears as Mass for Annabelle by Harold C. Norman, commissioned by John Quick in memory of his wife Annabelle, Kyrie Gloria Sanctus Credo Agnus Dei, sung by the Chatham Methodist Church, conducted by Harold C. Norman. Notwithstanding that the movements are listed out of order, the Sanctus should come before the Credo, and I'm sure the word choir is missing after the word church, this piece presents some interesting questions. I imagine that since Dr. Norman is listed as the conductor, a recording was played, but when it was made and when the work was composed is unknown. Most of the works in the archive are undated. There is no Mass for Annabelle in the archives. However, there are 5 movements of the Mass listed individually, and these probably make up the piece in question. As such, it is the longest single work Dr. Norman composed. Even though it is slightly abridged, there is no Benedictus section in the Sanctus. There is a First Methodist United Church in Chatham, but Dr. Norman's connection with it is unclear. Was he the choir director there? Also, there is no accompanist listed in the bulletin as being on the recording, yet the 5 Mass movements in the archives are not unaccompanied. Still, it seems that this is the work on the program. Either Dr. Norman or the person who arranged the service 2 months after he died thought this was a work worthy of listening to at a remembrance of his life. Again, the word practical comes to mind, for although it is written for 4-part chorus, the choir never sings in 4 parts. The sopranos and altos often sing together in unison, as do the tenors and the basses. And at times, the sopranos join the tenors in unison, and the altos and basses do the same. Sometimes all 4 voices sing in unison, and in one section speak rhythmically while the organ plays. The organ part, as in most of the other choral compositions accompaniments, is not overly difficult, and the overall harmony is that of extended tonality, so an amateur choir could definitely learn to sing this in a few rehearsals. What connection John and Annabelle Quick had with Dr. Norman is unclear, although the listing of music in the archives does list several other pieces that were written for special occasions, including Dance With Me, an anniversary waltz for Betty and Dick, dated June 30th, 1959, a song for solo verse with guitar chords, and For Grace, dated January 21st, 1981, a song with piano accompaniment, notable because Polly Norman wrote the words. Interestingly, these 2 works are dated. A most unusual piece by Dr. Norman, and one that cements his relationship with Wagner College, is his setting of The Man with the Hoe. This poem is intimately connected with Wagner. Its author, Edwin Markham, wrote it in 1898 in California, and strange for a poet, it made him rich. Based on a painting by Jean-Francois Millet of the same name that is now in the Getty Museum, it is a testament to working men, and it fits in with Markham's belief in Christian socialism. Although Markham was from the West Coast and for 8 years was the poet laureate of Oregon, he moved to Staten Island to be near his son, Virgil, also a writer, who was chairman of the English department at Wagner College. Markham Pare would leave his papers in the library to the college upon his death in 1940. Dr. Norman wrote his setting in a more modern and dissonant style than his church music. He composed it for solo, mezzo-soprano, flute, and a cappella choir, and it is much more difficult than his works for church choir. Like many of the music which I examined from the Luther College archive, it is undated. Perhaps he wrote it for the Wagner College choir, maybe during the year he took over when Dr. Steen was on sabbatical. One of the lines in the poem goes, "Rebuild in it the music and the dream." The it in the poem refers to the man in the picture, but let us think metaphorically for a while. Those of us who were students when Dr. Norman was department chairman were filled with music and dreams, and many of us successfully pursued vocations and avocations in music thanks to his leadership. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to thank Jim Chiavelli and David Martin, both of Wagner College, who arranged today. To Richard Brown, who photoshopped the picture, and to Edward Brown, who made that possible. To Ann Erickson, Janet Schreiber, and Susan Tremblay, who provided pictures. And to Charlie Geisel, who's our video guy for today. Thank you again. Okay, so we will now